Hey guys, Thomas the Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, and welcome to my review of Welcome to the Hazbin Hotel. So, before I can even touch this review, I suppose I should explain why I decided to even review this little potential series, as this is just the pilot that I will be reviewing today. I've reviewed other shows in the past, The Walking Dead, Ruby, I'm trying to remember what else I reviewed as a series, Preacher, MLP, and that went over to my other channel, which is, I suppose, dead at this point, because the show isn't, it's over, so... Anyway, I just saw this pop up, and I didn't have the previewed knowledge that this was even something that was being worked on, so I wasn't even in the know that this was being made, which I think helped out as an outsider of, like, just being able to be a little bit more on the objective side, which is something I strive to try to do here on my channel a lot more. I'm really working hard toward that more and more these days. The other reason I decided to review this show is that as someone who is very interested in animation, especially here on YouTube, which is a rarity on itself, by the way. I am actually shocked that this was allowed on YouTube and they were able to make this work. So congratulations on that alone. But in all seriousness, as someone who had an idea on this animated thing that I had in my head, like, being able to write it is something I can do. I've never been a particularly good artist or animator. Those are my weak points, which is very frustrating, by the way. Having all these ideas in my head and not being able to display them in this sort of way. I think that the creators of this or the creator of this is very lucky to have known animators that were very keen on making this project a reality. So I do want to put that out there, that they, having that knowledge, having that network definitely pays off. And I think the location on where they all are in accordance to each other seems to be a very good thing. It seems like I saw the stream where they were answering questions as well after the fact, after the first episode aired. And they were able to have at least 3 of the guests, the creator herself, along with one of the writers, and then one of the actors being Edward Bosco. They were able to put all that together. So this is my review of the pilot of Hazbin Hotel, where we follow one Charlie. I'll start with the premise. I think that's the best way to start this review. This show takes place in hell, and her goal is to have this hotel and to rehabilitate or reform these creatures, instead of them having to go through this purge-like sequence, or this, I forget the term that they officially used. It was like a cleansing, I believe, or something like that. To reform them so that they can get to heaven. And she believes that this idea will work. And she puts forth this idea to this radio station to get it out there, and everyone thinks that it's a joke. And as a sort of rebuttal, she says that one of her clients, being this other character named Angel Dust, is already gone through in a certain amount of time, being 2 weeks, and has been clean for a set amount of time, only to see moments later that one Angel Dust has decided to take part in this turf war. And these turf wars are happening because of the cleansing that is happening. And this turf war is to decide who is now going to take over these certain sections of Hell. So there seems to be this world building that is happening of how Hell works. Like, there seems to be some sort of these sections. That part's a little hard to gauge right now in terms of just where the pilot is, but at least they established that there are sectors or something like that. And we kind of go from place to place. We see Charlie's character go through that. We also are introduced to Angel Dust earlier. The very flamboyant, the very obvious gay porn star who does a little extra work on this other unnamed character, and proceeds to get some drugs named after him, Angel Dust. I found that a bit odd, but okay. I think that needs a little bit of explaining. Maybe he makes the drugs. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's just named after him. So I don't know what the whole deal with that is. But nonetheless, so we have the setup of that character pretty early on as well, and establishing that he wants to take part in the whole turf war. And they meet this snake-like character whose name I heard it, but I'm trying to do this without notes, and I struggled with this with Preacher as well as, like, not Preacher, Into the Badlands, which is another series I did a review series on. Trying to learn the terminology was something I struggled with, and names are something I also struggle with from time to time, so I do apologize in advance if I didn't catch, or if I didn't write down and remember the snake's name, but nonetheless, he's like the cliched, at least the way he's represented in this episode, the very cliched, like, I'm gonna take over, be the obvious bad guy. Kind of reminds me of Dr. Robotnik a lot, honestly, like that sort of persona. A little mix of that with the evil scientist from Phineas and Ferb. I forget his name, but sort of like the obvious, like, I'm gonna be the bad guy of this episode. I hope somebody stops me. Looks around nervously. Like, I don't know if that's what they're going for quite yet. I don't know if, like, he seems like more predicated on actually trying to take over. And he's a bit clueless in that regard, as once Angel Dust is fighting him, and then Angel Dust does one of his sexual mockeries of, "Ooh, daddy," he really gets confused. He really calls him, or, like, calls out, like, son in a confusing manner. And I don't know what they were going for. I guess they left it up into interpretation. Although I would say, as someone who looks into design in that manner, it doesn't seem like they would be related in that sense of, like, him being an actual father. I think that he was just confused and then actually just blurted out son in a confusing manner. Anywho, putting that aside, I should also say that the only one of the issues I had with the pilot, and again, I'm trying to be objective here. I'm trying to, if there are any issues, I want to point them out. I want to make sure that, the creators are aware that, I'm not just going to be the yes men, the little eggs that are saying, "Oh, you did a good job," all the way through. No. The one thing I had an issue with, or the first issue I had with this, is the second song that comes up that Charlie sings, and near the end, it gets really hard to hear the lyrics of what she is saying. I get that they were going for a very bombastic song, and when it was first speeding up, it was still understandable. But I think they did something to her pitch, that's what it sounded like to me, and it became really hard to hear what she was saying, and I do think that's a legitimate issue. You know, when you're doing a musical, you want to make sure that that you are still capable of understanding what the characters are saying. And the other thing I kind of thought of when thinking of that is there's Vaggie, Charlie's girlfriend, who seems to be, from what I understand, some form of Hispanic character. She does speak Spanish at some point when she gets really frustrated with Angel Dust, because Angel Dust, with Charlie, returns back to the hotel, and she says something. She says like "caron," then she says something else, and I don't know what she said. And again, I think it's the way it was said. It's not. And I think a little bit of translation at the bottom would have helped as well. The only thing I heard was "caron," which is obviously a swear in Spanish. So yeah, there was that as well, in terms of just being able to understand what the characters are saying. I think really that was like the first really noticeable, like, okay, you can work on that a little bit, in terms of just making sure that your audience knows what your characters are saying at all times. Anyway, so they return to the hotel. Both of them are pretty upset with Angel Dust, and Charlie feels more upset that her goals feel that they are not being able to be achieved at this point. She calls her mom, which is set up for something else, for something later down the line. So yeah, we get that. We get her answering the door to Radio Demon. I know he has another name, but I'm just going to refer to him as the Radio Demon for simplification. So he comes in, and we see him sort of in other parts of the pilot as well. Sort of like we see his outline, or his presence being kind of there at certain locations and sort of paying attention to what she's been saying and how she's been singing it. And that's gauged his interest in wanting to participate in this hotel to essentially have other demons come here and then fail, and that will create a form of entertainment for him. We also see his level of power as the snake guy returns to attack once again, and then when we see Radio Demon just able to manipulate his hands and create these hentai tentacle demons and snap them up, his entire ship. So he explains that, again, he's there for that entertainment purpose, and they come to some sort of agreement without actually making a deal, which is something Vaggie was very concerned about, considering the whole deal process seems to indicate that there's going to be there could have been further shenanigans from this character, but he seems that he will hold back for now. Also introducing two other characters, one which he creates from the pits of hell. I think her name was Nifty, I want to say, or something like that. She's obsessed with cleaning, and she starts to do that, and then he also brings in honestly, I cut his name, but I'm blanking on it again. He looks like a bat, I want to say, a drunk bat character with a very black and white cat design. So we're introduced to this character, and he's very much having none of this, but Radio Demon brings him along anyway, saying that he will man the bar. Angel Dust seems very keen on keeping the bar, and seems already sexually attracted to said character as well. But he doesn't seem to reciprocate anything. He even says that he's unable to love, which, love and sex are two very different things. You can have one without the other, just to make that clear. And I'm aware of that, obviously. So yeah, there's that. And they sort of do the whole setup of what that character is as well. They don't spend as much time with him, but you kind of get a basic sense of he's a gambler to some extent. I guess I'll just call him the cat bat creature for now. Until someone comments what his name is and yells at me for not remembering his name. I'm sure someone who's watched the show will yell at me. I'll be very glad that someone is paying attention and commenting on that sort of stuff. Making sure that I'm also learning and being criticized, because that's just as important to me as me criticizing a show like this. Again, from the point of view of just making sure you're able to understand your characters, in terms of just what they're saying. So, that about wraps up the basic premise. And they set up enough with these characters. There are definitely some more background characters in the whole look and design of it that can cause an interest in terms of just like, what is this world, what is, building up all these other things. And yeah, it does feel like this show is like trying to hit shovel beats. It's like, being funny. It's telling a story about characters that are very, very, starting very, very flawed, and it definitely creates this instant, like, interest in terms of, like, okay, so assuming that this continues and assuming that more creatures come upon this hotel, once they arrive, like, how long does it take for them to get redeemed, what actually happens when they get redeemed, and, what that actually means in terms of the show. What actually happens? Do they actually get access to heaven? Like, is that actually what happens? I don't know. So, it definitely has created an interest in terms of, like, what the premise is, figuring out what they're going to do with all of that, building up these characters, particularly Charlie. I think they definitely focused most on the character that we are obviously going to follow, which makes sense. So yeah, creating these dynamics, creating this sort of basic, easy route of, like, here's how the character growth can happen. It was a very smart idea to start off these characters very, very flawed, because that allows the growth to just come way more naturally, and it just makes the characters better earlier on. And I think that's very important when it comes to writing characters, is establishing their weaknesses early on, letting the audience know what routes that they can go on to become better characters. etc., etc. Obviously, that's something I am very predicated on, really honing in on, what constitutes character growth, and making sure that once said character growth happens, that we don't have like a mistake like in My Little Pony of like, oh no, the characters are regressing for this episode. I really hope that this show can avoid that issue. And yeah, so I thought that was a little bit of an interesting Q&A question, by the way, when they mentioned about like having from like the term of a musical of like having the characters outside actually interact with the musical, because that is actually something that happened more recently in the more recent seasons of My Little Pony. So that is something that I caught of like, I'm just gonna assume that that individual did not watch the show, and was unaware that another show has done that before. But yeah, it is probably more oftentimes than not that in a musical, characters don't really address it. Again, just more oftentimes than not, so I'm not really surprised either that wouldn't have caught on. Anyway, so I suppose the last thing I will talk about that has nothing to do with the show is the project that I had in mind, the animated thing that I had locked in my head, and it has its own inspirations, and again, I can only come at it from a writer's perspective. I can't draw the characters that well. I might show you like a really, really bad drawing, and a separate video if anyone cares to see it, but again, I'm not an artist, so get ready for some nasty looking shit. But anyway, ironic, well, I don't know if it's irony or not, but point being that the premise that I had for an idea is because this idea came from, and so if someone sees this and wants to steal my idea, go for it. I don't, like, that's how much I don't care about my own, like, thing anymore, like, I guess my life anymore. It's just like, if I have an idea, feel free to steal it. I don't care anymore. I'm so sad and depressed. And I'm envious of the show. I'm envious of how it was able to come together. I even commented on the pilot of I said if I were a demon, I'd be envious. I'd be an envy demon, I suppose. And just to get it out there, if I were to be a character in the show, yes, I would totally let Angel Dust suck my dick. I'm gonna say it, I'm gonna go that far. Anyway, getting back to the concept, getting back to the idea of the thing that I was talking about. So, there have been quite a few theories that have predicated the internet of like, oh, what if in Pokemon the main character was in a coma all along? Walking Dead, what if your cop guy was in a coma all along? And this mentality of, oh, character has been in coma all along, that cliche, except it's only been in theory a lot of the times. And the idea I wanted for my show is actually exploring it. Actually exploring the actual cliche, what if the character was actually in a coma? Like, that is actually the premise of the show. And with character in the coma, he goes to, again, I suppose now that this has been out, I would consider it, instead of being hell, it'd be more of a limbo. So the character, while in a coma, ends up in a limbo-like world, limbo-like atmosphere, and he meets, obviously you can tell that I already have a character set in mind. I said he. I have a name and everything. But he meets all these other characters who live in this house, and outside of this limbo, there are creatures that just sort of roam around and are more of a vicious, a more vicious variety, I suppose. And said creatures that live in the house have the idea I had in my head is very comparable to The Last Airbender, because that is one of my that's my favorite Nickelodeon show of all time, I think. I think that's a very easy statement to make on, from a subjective standpoint, and I think I can back it up with objective facts of the show, but that would be a whole nother video. Anyway, so the 4 characters that live in this house, that's the set of amount of characters that I had in mind to follow, at least in the start, just to keep things a little simple. Each one would be a possessive of one of the elements, and how they use and wield their elements would sort of come into play. The 4 characters would have very varying different lifestyles, and they're all one of them being in the obvious coma, and he's able to interact with these characters and get to know them, and they all have their different quirks and personalities and character, and these outside forces that are sort of meandering about, sort of eventually get to the house and, you know, defending from that, and what it means to fight and what it means to defend. I think that's something I want to tackle, because I have a very strong feeling about that. And the basic title that I had in my head was like the filling title that I had in my head was called Alongside Your Bed, as in someone is there watching over the young individual in the state of their coma, and watching that character and praying for them and dealing with all sorts of different subjects, from, like, you know, having to deal with that from the outside and the human world and the world that we are being introduced to, sort of like separating it. I would say obviously heavily inspired from the movie Spirited Away, of like, oh, we're in a whole new world, there are different creatures, you know, stuff like that. So yeah, definitely combining my things that have heavily inspired me to want to write stuff. But again, now being able to draw it is like one of the most frustrating things, and I don't have the type of money to like hire an artist. I like to do like 30 or so episodes, or however long and like a season would be. I assume a reasonable number would be like 20 something, but just to like start it off. But again, I don't have the money to afford that sort of concept and make it a reality. Like, these individuals clearly had not only the team, they had the money to go about doing something like this. So yeah, like, I'm already envious. I would already want to be a voice actor in this show. Like, damn, like, so damn impressive. And, you know, since I already do YouTube for free, I would say I would do it for free. Even though I already just made a video saying how I'm very poor and my life is suffering and all that, I would still do it for free, absolutely. You know, I'll tweet this review to the creator, just so that that's that. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are greatly appreciated. Until next time, everyone, bye-bye.